I have a question for all of you. Can you really call something a pay-per-view if it's free? It was just something that kind of stood out to me when Tanae and Taz were commentating during this week's Impact episode, this Hardcore Justice show. They kept referring to the fact how awesome it was that it was a free pay-per-view event. Isn't that kind of contradictory? Isn't that kind of like an oxymoron? It's pay-per-view, yet it's free. Whatever. So let's talk about this Hardcore Justice episode. In general, I guess my biggest complaint about this was it felt like a show that they were trying to cram 2.5 or 3 hours of crap into a 2-hour show. So things kind of felt rushed at times. Things didn't get the proper follow-up, whatever the case might be. It felt like they were trying to cram a lot into this 2-hour block. Maybe my suggestion would be if they're going to do these free pay-per-views on TV, maybe try the best you can to get with the network and get 3 hours of time so that way you can have what equates to a full pay-per-view. Because otherwise it just feels like another regular episode of Impact. The only difference with this show compared to maybe some others was that the 4 matches that you had, most of them got a lot more time than you might usually see. Other than that, this really didn't feel like a big-time pay-per-view event. It just felt like a standard, typical episode of Impact with some hardcore stipulations to the matches. The BFG Series ladder match that opened the show seemed to have a lot going for it, and for most of the match, it was really damn good. It was a really strong, impressive way to kick off Impact and the Hardcore Justice show. But then you get to the finish. Now, a lot of people are bitching about the finish. You've got people bitching about the fact that of all the things that got Hardy off the ladder, it was the Apple Teeny. And the Apple Teeny didn't even connect with Hardy, yet he still sold it. So why go through all those bumps just to sit there and have somebody get something spit in their face? It doesn't even hit their face. I get that. My bigger question is this, the way this match finished. I don't have a problem with Kaz winning. You know, it made sense for him to get those 20 BFG Series points. In general, like I said, the match was really outstanding, a really good way to kick off the show. But what really bothered me is it's supposed to be Hardcore Justice, and this is a ladder match. Since when can you get DQ'd in a ladder match? What I mean is, everybody's talking about all the bumps and the Apple Teeny. I think people are losing sight of why would Bobby Roode and Christopher Daniels have to run distractions or interference in order to get involved with the match? Why? It wouldn't matter, would it? That makes no sense to me. I was just sitting there, I'm like, man, this finish was lame because it didn't make any sense. And TNA sometimes seems to forget this stuff. It's these small details. It's these basic things that you would think people that have been in the wrestling business for years that know far, far more, or should, in theory, know far, far more than any of us that actually watch the television product. They can't seem to remember simple things like a ladder match is supposed to be no DQ. Henceforth, it shouldn't matter if a Roode and a Daniels come out and interfere because it's anything goes. At least that's what I thought. Maybe TNA has different rules for ladder matches? It was just really strange and typical of TNA. Take a great match and ruin it with a poorly executed finish.
Smokey got 2 things to get off his chest really quick. Number 1, I'm still tired and still semi-protesting TNA's racism. Where the fuck the alpha male Monty Brown? Where the fuck is the Pope D'Angelo De Niro? Where the fuck is Kenny King? They should all be in motherfucking main event Mafia. They should be the 3 main members if you ask Smokey. Now, as far as the other piece of business, a lot of y'all real fucking funny, ain't you? Real funny. Hello, ladies. Yes, I know. Even though I'm pissed, I still got plenty of sexy going on. A lot of you like hashtag let summer in. Hashtag let summer in. How about hashtag fuck right the hell off? Fuck all y'all. I don't care. Deuces and Fours is Smokey's playground. It ain't for dogs. It was founded by 2 cats, and I'm the ultimate founder. Yeah, fucking pissed me off with that shit. I'm gonna sit on the camera now because I can. You don't get to see no more Smokey, motherfucker.
Knockouts triple threat match. If I'm not mistaken, I thought Velvet was supposed to be there. It was supposed to be some type of knockouts tag. I don't know what really happened. I don't really care. All I know is that this was one of the matches featured on this free pay-per-view, Hardcore Justice, and ugh, ugh. So apparently Brooke Hogan was released from TNA. Imagine that. Was it the fact that you were paying her a certain amount of money because of the last name attached to her? The same last name that belongs to her dad, Hulk Hogan? Yeah, because she sure as hell wasn't very good on screen. She wasn't a very good performer at all. It seemed like every week she was finding a way to screw up her lines. Her delivery was poor. She's not that great to look at. And even the way you were using her was pretty stupid. And if you looked at it in the real world from a merit standpoint, if you wanted to say, let's measure it based off of how the knockouts are doing, that also would lead to her getting fired. Because, storyline wise, if you translate it to the real world, she did a terrible job. Are we going to miss her on TNA's product? No. Who was Bully Ray talking to? Was it Brooke Hogan? Is it another Brooke? I'm just wondering if they knew before they filmed that Brooke was already released, Brooke Hogan that is, and they were doing something else, or is this something where they planned it out one way and then they changed their mind, so as a result they're going to have to shake things up a little bit? I guess we'll find out next week and going forward. So November 2nd, Rampage Jackson and Tito Ortiz have a Bellator fight, in case you didn't know. You better know after this week's episode of Impact, because you now fully understand why Rampage Jackson and Tito Ortiz were brought in to TNA Impact Wrestling. It was in large part to promote Bellator, and in particular, their fight on November 2nd on the Bellator pay-per-view. Because you heard this throughout the course and period of the night. I mean, this was mentioned by Sting, it was mentioned by this person and that person, and Rampage and Tito and the commentators over and over and over again. If you're too naive to understand what's really going on here, then you have a problem. You live in a bubble. If you had any doubts or any questions at all about why these two were really brought in, you found out this week. Now, as far as their main event mafia, since Angle wanted to be a dumb drunk and try and get behind the wheel of the vehicle drunk yet again, they've got to find somebody else to work the 5-on-5 match against the main event mafia next week. I don't know when you originally announced it for this week's show why you had to push it back to next week. Whatever the case might be, that's what they did. Fine. So Rampage says, I got somebody I'm going to call out. Sting earlier in the night tried to get Austin Aries. That makes sense. He's a main event type guy for them. He's a former world champion, former X Division champion, the greatest man that ever lived, all that other stuff. He said no. Rampage tries to call out Tito Ortiz, their history together, what have you. Also to remind you again that Rampage Jackson and Tito Ortiz are fighting on the Bellator pay-per-view November 2nd. Rampage Jackson, I really don't have a problem with him being in Impact, though. I want to make that clear if anybody wonders. I don't mind, because you could tell there's a little bit of a passion there. You could tell that he loves wrestling, that he loves the wrestling business. He might not necessarily know a lot of what he's doing, but he wants to be there. He likes being there. He likes what the business is about. He likes that entertainment form, so to speak. So I don't have a problem with Rampage there. And in his own way, he has his own charisma. He's not great on the mic, but I think he does a good enough job to get his message across. I think Tito Ortiz is probably just there to pick up a paycheck at this point. I don't think he really cares. I think Rampage does. So I have much less of a problem with Rampage being there as opposed to Tito Ortiz. I think you could actually make some type of professional wrestler out of Rampage Jackson. I really do. This whole thing of calling Tito Ortiz out, and then, and then, of course, Bully Ray, ugh. Don't forget, by the way, that Rampage Jackson fights Tito Ortiz November 2nd on the Bellator pay-per-view. Remember how earlier in the night I was alluding to the fact that it was a ladder match, but yet Daniels and Rude had to run distractions in order for the other person to interfere, even though that match is a ladder match, so henceforth it should be no DQ. Yeah, we didn't have that problem apparently when it came to the tables match. The tables match is different. It was another good match. This one obviously had a better finish to me in large part because they didn't try to sit there and distract the referee. They just sit there and interfered because they fucking could, because it was no disqualification. Imagine that. So, they are, though, trying to get over this new three-man faction. It's kind of reincarnation of Fortune, Team Ego, Team Bad Influence, whatever they're going to call themselves. The Great Influence. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to call themselves. But you have Kazarian gets 20 points for winning a match. You've got Rude gets 20 points for winning a match. They both had to do it in underhanded, kind of sneaky ways, which kind of fits them. And that's a good way to follow up on what you did the week before. Very, very good job by TNA. They definitely deserve credit for that. My thoughts on the main event, the steel cage match for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. I think you could probably see it coming. You should have known two things. That one, Saban was not going to hold the belt after this show. You should have known that. He was just a plot device. Understand that, please, once and for all. He was nothing more than a plot device to continue the story and advance the story between the Aces and Eights and Main Event Mafia. Chris Sabin is a perfect example of not even a transitional champion, because he just went right back to Bully Ray. He was the example of that plot device champion, that story champion that was just made champion and then was immediately second fiddle and never stopped being second fiddle. The ironic thing was Saban earlier on in this show actually cut a pretty good promo, especially for Chris Sabin. It's not something he's really known for. You know, hail Saban my ass. Thankfully, he's not their world champion anymore. That's a joke. Bully Ray being their champion is almost as much of a joke at this point, but not quite as much, because at least now, I understand the whole thing with Saban and Bully Ray. You had to have something for Bully Ray to do until you got to Bound for Glory, and I get that. So you're probably going to have another match between Saban and Bully Ray, maybe even at No Surrender. I understand that. You know, one last grudge match, you know, the blow-off, whatever you want to call it. But Bully Ray's the champion. That's better than Chris Sabin being champion. Not by much, but it is. Hopefully you get to Bound for Glory and get somebody like AJ Styles to win the title, and maybe TNA can start getting back to the business at hand and getting back on the right track. As far as the whole heel turn by Tito Ortiz and him aligning himself with Bully Ray, they telegraphed it so well, because they're sitting there and having Bully Ray say he doesn't like Rampage or Tito, doesn't respect either one of them, and all of a sudden he's doing this now. It almost makes you think the whole time, oh, I'm planting the seed that, you know, I don't like Tito, but I really do. Okay. You know, I mean, in light of their November 2nd fight on the Bellator pay-per-view, Rampage and Tito, now you've got Tito hitting Rampage in the head with the hammer. He sold it like a champ, though. Give Rampage that. Like I said, I don't have a problem with him being in TNA, because I think he gets it, and I think he loves it, and I think he enjoys it. I really do. If he sold that hammer shot like a fucking champ. Tito Ortiz, I still think he's stupid. I think he's stupid. I mean, fuck Jenna Jameson. Ugh. It's one thing to talk about a porn star, you know, it's all fine and great, but actually doing one, knowing what all's been there. Anyways, so this show, 2 weeks ago I thought was horrendous. I thought last week's was just a tad better. I thought this week's was a little bit better. You're pumping this up, though, as a free pay-per-view. You probably should have had a little more in-ring action, not having a couple of promo segments. Usually on a pay-per-view that's 3 hours, you may sometimes have one promo segment, sometimes you don't. Could have stood to have more wrestling action on this show in general. 1 or 2 matches would have helped. It would have also helped to have this show be 2.5 or even a full 3 hours, because the show at times did feel very rushed with a lot of the things they were trying to do. It was like the way Russo used to structure show. It was like bam, 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 bam. You're trying to get everything in. So it's getting a little better to me compared to a couple weeks ago, but they still have a long way to go, in my opinion.